Darling, come, sit. Welcome back to the wonderful world of chess. And now we will continue our lesson. To do a quick recap, in the first lesson we learned about the names of all the pieces: the rook, the knight, the bishop, castle, horsey, pointy guy. I like my French fries. Cha. It's a good way to remember the order. Castle, horsey, pointy guy. Rook, knight, bishop, okay? In the middle, we have the queen and the king. The queen always has the tiara, the spiky hair, and the king always wears the cross on his crown. King and queen. In the front line, we have our foot soldiers, our pawns, on this beautiful metaphorical battlefield, okay? We learned about one of the great stories of the origins of the game of chess, which is the Raja and his Grand Vizier and Sissa, who only asked for grains of wheat and exponential growth and all those kinds of fun things. Okay, is that story true? I don't know. Honestly, probably not. But that's a fun story. And it teaches a very important lesson about what does it mean to have compounding interest and exponential growth. These are very important things to learn about at a young age, because the difference of starting a savings account when you are, let's say you're 12 years old, and you begin a savings account, of course, with your parents, your grandparents, your aunties, uncles, whoever, versus starting a savings account when you're 30 years old. Oof, dramatic differences on return, okay? Start investing young. Okay, now, we learned about all the names of the pieces, and we learned about the fool's mate. We learned about how the pieces move. Okay, remember the rook is on the files and on the ranks, right? The knight jumps 2 spaces, and then 1 to the side in an L shape, and he can only piece that can jump. The bishop, he moves on diagonal grooves like this. He moves on the diagonals, and you always have a dark squared bishop and a light squared bishop. Okay, remember the queen has to match her dress, so the beautiful white queen goes on a white square to match her battle robes, her dress. The dark queen, the black queen, goes on a dark square to match her beautiful dress, her battle robes. And that was basically and the pawns, the only pieces on the chessboard that cannot go backwards, and they can go on their first move 1 square or 2 squares, but they only attack in a diagonal direction, 1 square attacking like so. If I have a pawn here, I can attack 1 square in a diagonal, okay? Pawns cannot attack face to face. I like to imagine they have a shield and a little short sword, and they go kia to the sides, kia on the diagonals. Okay, good. And then I showed the most basic, the quickest checkmate in the game of chess. We call this the fool's mate. It's when the white pieces make 1 dubious move and 1 terrible move, and so after black wins checkmate after only making 2 moves. And that looks something like this. White moves out, let's say like this on the first move, opening up this very dangerous dark diagonal. Black thinks to themselves, that's an odd move to make, and they make a move like so. And if white makes that big blunder of then going here, opening up the dark diagonal, black swoops in with the queen up the diagonal and does the checkmating move in the fool's mate. Then I cannot block, I cannot attack, I cannot run away. Okay, so that is the most basics of chess. Now we must learn the last rules of piece movement. First and foremost, this one is very, very important. The next one, it's important, but it's not as common at all. In fact, I rarely use it. It's the enpassant rule, and I will show you what that is. So first off, castling. Now this is very important, darling. Castling is a way of protecting your king and getting your rooks aligned. And we'll play a little basic opening to demonstrate what this is looking like. So let's say white opens up very traditionally. E4, black responds like so. White then plays their knight here, developing their knight, attacking this pawn right here. Black often will go like so, bringing out their knight to defend the pawn. White will often either go here, which is known as the Italian game, where the bishop is now attacking the weak f7 pawn, or the bishop can come out here. Ironically, these are two very different openings. This one is the Italian game, and this one is the Spanish opening, known as the Ruy Lopez. Okay. Let's say they play this move. Bishop comes to here. Black continues that development like so, and white continues that development like so. And what we now have is a classic opening known as the four knights opening. Okay, four knights obviously on the board. Ruy Lopez happening, the Spanish opening for the white pieces. And let us continue our development. Let's say black continues by getting out their light squared bishop, so we move a pawn up, creating a little pawn chain, so 3 pawns in a row. Extra defense here. Let us say white does the same. And make it a little game looks like this. Black makes a move. Let's say they develop a bishop, unpinning the knight here. The knight was pinned to the king. In other words, at this point in time, the knight is not allowed to move. For if the knight moves, the king would be in check. And this is illegal. You are never allowed to put your king in harm's way in a game of chess. Now, if you are playing speed chess, the rules are slightly different. Speed chess is when you are using a clock. Each side has the same amount of time. For example, 5 minutes apiece, or blitz, 3 minutes apiece, or 2 minutes apiece. Very, very quick games. In which case then you are actually allowed to capture the king. But in standard chess, this is not allowed, darling. Okay, so the knight is pinned. We bring the bishop up to unpin the knight. And let us say white develops the other bishop. And we do another bishop move here. And now we are ready, almost ready to castle either side. Let us just say, for the sake of this particular game, that the queen moves up a square. And my reason for demonstrating this is that now the king can make eye contact with either rook, the king side rook over here, or the queen side rook on this side, the short and the long. And now we may make a move known as castling. Now, castling is a very special move in chess. You get to break 3 rules of piece movement that you learned. 1, the king gets to move 2 spaces. It's the only time in a game of chess where this is allowed. 2, the rook, and notice I'm saying the rook gets to jump, not the king. The rook gets to jump. And 3, you move 2 pieces in 1 turn. It's the only time in a game of chess you're allowed to do this. You can't undo it. It's a one-time move. Okay? Now, you don't have to be able to make eye contact with both rooks in order to castle. White could have castled at this point, but only to the king side. Okay? But with the queen moves, and let's say we want to actually move as well, but I can only castle on the king side. Now let us just say I castle king side. 1, 2, and the rook jumps over the king. Okay? But now I demonstrate on your side of the board so you can see it better. So the king can either go to the king side or short, which is the more common castling. 1, 2, rook jumps over the king, like so. Now you will notice another thing. This is very important. In the game of chess, darling, how many hands did I just use? 1, and only 1. You can only use 1 hand when you play a game of chess. If I go like this, this is illegal. You are not allowed to use 2 hands when you play a game of chess. Only 1 hand, okay? 1 hand when you play a game of chess. This is to eliminate tomfoolery and the opportunities for cheating, okay? So 1 hand only. The king goes 2 spaces. The rook jumps over the king. Now, also notice This would be illegal. Pay attention, watch carefully. The rook goes like this. Bop, bop, and the king jumps over the rook. Illegal. You cannot do this, darling. Why? Because in chess, there's a great rule known as touch rule. And this rule simply means whatever piece you touch first, you must move that piece, provided there is a legal move you can make. So, for example, if I touch this pawn right now, well, the pawn can't move anywhere. And I will be dinged for bad behavior. And now the other way I could castle is the long side, the queen side, where the king still goes 2 spaces. The rook jumps a bit farther over the king, but notice no matter what side I go, the king always moves 2 squares, and then the rook jumps over the king. Okay? King goes 2 spaces, bump, bump. Rook jumps over the king. King side or a short castle. Or the king goes boop, boop. Rook jumps a bit further over the king. This is a long or queen side castle. Okay, easy enough, right? Good. However, there are times when you are allowed to castle and times when you are not. One, like I said, if I touch this rook, I must move this rook, and then I can no longer castle to the queen side because, remember this, you cannot castle. There are 5 rules. Into check. Of course, you can never move into check, but you cannot castle into check. You cannot castle out of check. Very important. If your king is under attack, you cannot castle to be safe. Okay? In the check, out of check, you may not castle through check, and I will demonstrate this in just a moment. You cannot castle in the check, out of check, through check, if the king or the rook has moved. So if I touch this rook, I have to move this rook to a square, and then I can no longer castle to the queen side in this case. I could still castle to the king side, but if I move my king at some point in the game for whatever reason, I can now no longer castle. Even if the king goes back to the home square, it does not matter. The king has moved. I can no longer castle. Okay? In the check, out of check, through check, if the king or the rook has moved. Okay, so let's make a puzzle. Okay? Let's get rid of a lot of pieces really quick. Make it like a relatively simple puzzle. We'll start simple, and then we'll go and we'll make it more complicated. Okay? Simple scenario. Let's say the board looks like so. Let's get the queens off. Okay. Black has castled for whatever reason. This is a hypothetical. Black moves the rook to here. Okay. E8. Right? So the black king is here. Can the white king castle? No, because the white king is in check, and you may not castle to get out of check, even though that would be wonderful. You are not allowed to do it, okay? You cannot castle to get out of check. Let's put our board back a little bit. Let's do some weird pawn structures. Sure, why not? Let's make it a little more interesting. Let's say this looks like so, blah, blah, blah. And let us put up a scenario. Okay. Like this. Let's say we're like this. And black makes a move. Black goes from here. Black goes to here. Okay. Can the white king castle? No, because the white king is in check. Very good. Okay, so the white king would have to move out of check. All right. We could also block, but blocking would be a very bad idea. And we'll get into that tactic a bit later, but let's say white blocks the check like this with that pawn. Well, the king is no longer in check. However, which piece should black now capture back with? Do you see it? Good, correct, with the bishop. Because now the king is in check. And this is called a fork, where I'm attacking the king and the rook at the same time. So the king would have to move out of the way. And now I can capture the rook over here like so. Okay, good. All right. And let us say, okay, let's say this bishop is still here, for example. All right. And let us say this bishop is here. Black makes a move when they move their bishop all the way up here like so. May the white king castle. If you said no, congratulations, good, because if I did castle, I would be castling through check. I'd be going through the bishop's line of attack, and the king may not even for one brief moment put himself into harm's way, darling, so I cannot castle through check. Plus, it'd be a bad idea. I would lose the rook to the bishop anyway, but the question wasn't should I castle, and I cannot castle to the king's side because the bishop is blocking the way. So the question was, can the white king castle? So the answer is no. Okay. If the white bishop goes here, possibly preparing to castle, okay, but black opts to do a bishop trade. Black captures the bishop. The white king captures the bishop. Okay. May the white king castle? No, exactly. Even if black castles, white goes back to the home square. Black makes whatever move they make. They probably should go here, but let's say they go here for some crazy reason. It does not matter. The white king may not castle. He has already moved. Okay, this is castling, darling. Are there any questions? Good, wonderful. Okay, good. The last rule, okay? The last rule is a funky rule, okay? It is the last rule, and it is the most, I don't know, abused is an interesting word. It is one of the most confused rules in all of chess, okay? And this rule is the enpassant rule, okay? Enpassant. That means in passing. And the reason this rule exists is because a long time ago, chess was getting a little more basic. No, basic is the wrong word. Back before they had solidified all the rules, okay? Pawns could only move one square at a time. So the game would go like ba-boop, 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 ba-boop. And they thought, you know what, this is too slow. Let us pick up the pace of the game a little bit. And let us say that now a pawn may move one square or two spaces on its first move only. Okay, this is good. And let's say black does this. And then white maybe does this. Oh, this is interesting. So now this white pawn here, he has passed the middle of the chessboard. He is standing one rank inside the enemy's territory over here. And let us say that the black pawn goes boom, like so. Well, notice that this black pawn jumped past his line of attack. And the chess people said, well, this cannot happen. A pawn, the foot soldier, should always be able to either block or attack another foot soldier. There should not be this. A foot soldier should not be able to jump past another foot soldier. And they said, this is right. This is the truth. We need to make a special rule that if a pawn jumps past another pawn's line of attack, it has to be the following circumstances. They must be standing shoulder to shoulder. Okay? That's only when the pawn moves two squares. It can only happen on a pawn's first move. A pawn moves two squares. They are standing shoulder to shoulder. And the white pawn will capture the black pawn as if the black pawn had only moved one square. Confusing? I hope not. So this is called en passant. Okay? It only applies to pawns. It's only pawn-on-pawn violence. You cannot en passant a bishop or a knight or a queen, okay? Some of my students are cheeky. They're like, en passant a king. Ha. And while cute and funny, this is of course impossible. It's only when the pawn moves out 2 spaces, it jumps past another pawn's line of attack. This pawn may, if they wish, capture as if the pawn moved only 1 square. Now, they don't have to, okay? The game can just play on like so. Nothing's fine. The game just continues, okay? So again, let's look at some scenarios, and you tell me if it's legal to do an en passant capture, okay? Say the board looks like this, and let's say I get a pawn here, and I get a pawn here. Let's say the board is like this, okay? And let us say it is the white pieces move, okay? This white pawn opts to go here. Can the black pawn capture? Boom, en passant, like this. No. Good, because this pawn only moved 1 square. Good. If this pawn had been back here and moved up 2 spaces, then I could capture en passant. But because the pawn was already here, and he had the option to capture, and he opted to move past but only 1 space, this guy cannot do that. Illegal. Okay? Very good. Oh, I forgot to mention one last thing about en passant. It's that it has to happen immediately. So if this pawn had been here, he moves out all the way like so, and this black pawn goes like so, and the white pawn goes like so. I can no longer en passant capture because it has to happen on that turn, that move. Okay? So, what are the 3 rules when a pawn moves 2 spaces? They are standing shoulder to shoulder, and it has to happen immediately, if at all. This is not checkers. You don't have to capture en passant if you don't want to. But it's important to know that the rule is there, darling. Very, very important. So one more scenario. Let's say, let's move some pawns and pieces around. Ba-doop, 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 ba-doop. Let's go way up in the business. Way up in the business like this. Okay, like so. And it is now the white piece's turn. And the white pawn moves out 2 spaces. Boom, boom. Can this pawn capture en passant with check? No. Good. Because they are not standing shoulder to shoulder. And again, this pawn would have had the option to capture here. The whole point is that a pawn cannot jump past another pawn's attack or defense, where in this case the pawn could have. So if the pawn goes here, again, I cannot capture en passant because I did not move out 2 spaces. It is only when a pawn comes 2 spaces, they are shoulder to shoulder, I may capture as if that pawn had only moved out 1 square. Darling, this is the last of the rules of the game. You now know all of the basic rules of chess. And in the next lesson, we will go into more tactics, opening theory, and get into a little bit more of the nuance of the game itself. Until then, bye-bye, darling. Shoo, shoo, shoo. Bye-bye. I talk to you later. Bye-bye.